our democracy has been rendered extremely fragile and vulnerable over the last 10 years and possibly even longer. And I think the damage has occurred on several fronts.
We have our constitution, we have our judiciary, our prime minister puts the constitution on his head, but it's emptied out. And doing it through law. It's not as if, so democracy has died through its own means.
I think the media has played a very major role in actually promoting the anti-Muslim sentiment that has today become quite normalized, whether in a passive or overt way.
I think when the history of our times is written, it's going to be held very highly culpable.
Very different. So we are in a very, very, dangerous area.
I'm quite clear that what I like to call passive communalism will continue, because it has struck roots. That poison runs very deep in our society, in our social fabric today.
The first thing perhaps in restoration of our civil liberties would be the remembrance of a shared culture. The stupid Hindutva notion is idiotic. We are the product of a Sanji Virasat. Accept it. Accept it. And accept it offers infinite more possibilities.
Salam, Namaste, Zindabad, friends. We are back in this series of conversations about the state of the Indian Republic. Ye Daag Daag Ujala. Today we are sitting at a time when we have a new government. It's a coalition government. It comes at the end of a bitterly fought electoral contest. Many of us regard this to be perhaps the most consequential election after we became a republic, because whether India would even survive as a secular democracy would be decided by the outcomes. The outcomes, however, are mixed. A friend remarked that this was an extraordinary election also because it offered a victory which sounded like a defeat. It offered a defeat which had the radiance of victory. So the question that we have gathered here to reflect about is, can we expect realistically repair to the damages that have happened to our democracy over recent years? I have an absolutely fantastic panel to discuss this. On my left, first is Pamela Philipose. She's one of the country's most senior and I would say most trusted media persons. She's ombudsperson also of The Wire and a writer of many books, as all three of my guests are. Next, we have Professor Neera Chandhoke. Neera has been a very, very popular, charismatic professor of political science in Delhi University. And she's also, we're proud to say, a distinguished fellow of the Center for Equity Studies. And our third guest here is Niraja Jayal. Niraja is again a professor a very distinguished professor of political science. She taught much of her working life in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Today, she's teaching political science in the King's College in London. So let me start with you, Niraja. My first question is, when we're speaking about the possibilities and prospects of repair of our democracy, when I say this, I'm suggesting that our democracy is in a state of disrepair. Do you agree? And what is the nature of this damage? What is the scale of this damage? And only then can we look at what are the prospects of their repair. Nija, how would you rate this?
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you that our democracy has been rendered extremely fragile and vulnerable over the last 10 years and possibly even longer, as you said. And I think the damage has occurred on several fronts. So, there's the constitutional legal front, there's the separation of powers between branches of government, there is the checks and balances that are supposed to operate on executive power have not been operating well. Constitutional positions have, their own autonomy has been undermined. Whether it's, the president, the vice president, the governor, positions of that kind are no longer performing in the way in which, or as autonomously as we would like. And the same goes for what we call fourth branch institutions, which is, whether it's the Election Commission, the Comptroller and Auditor General, the Information Commission, all of these have been enfeebled to a considerable extent. Now, this is, across the world recognized. In many countries, this phenomenon has been given the name of autocratic legalism, which means that you can actually, within the law, do ostensibly, technically legal things, but use the law in a way that undermines democracy and undermines the rule of law.
A kind of autocratic democracy as well, would you say?
Well,
An electoral autocracy.
Yes, that is a standard phrase. That is a standard phrase. But autocratic legalism basically suggests that you use democratic mechanisms and the laws that furnish a democracy to actually undermine democracy itself. So and that is a phenomenon that, like I said, across the world, this is the name that's been given to it by people in the legal community.
Neera, I mean, if you agree with Niraja's assessment, what's brought us to this place? And that's again the subject of, I'm sure you could take a whole series of classes on it. But is the disrepair as grave and extensive as she spoke about? And how did we come here? Was it just the last 10 years or?
I was thinking of Ambedkar's speech on the 25th of November 1949, and he quoted John Stuart Mill, who has written this acclaimed book on liberty. He said, "Do not put your liberties at the feet of great men. Do not lay your liberties at the feet of great men. They deserve our respect, but that is all. Do not barter your liberties for anybody." In 2014, this is precisely what the Indian people did. They laid their liberties at the feet of a ruler who is distinguished by, well, charisma in a way, and somebody who seemed very determined, who seemed to have the answers to all the questions of the human condition. That was the first step, I think, toward what Niraja talked about. Basically, the democracy has identified 4 levels. The advantage of the theory of autocracy is that the final level is not determinate. From an electoral democracy, you will not necessarily go to a complete autocracy. And I think India has shown us that, because in theory, the powers of the BJP seem to have been truncated because their numbers have been truncated, and somebody was mapping out where the BJP lost, and these were the precise places at which the Prime Minister engaged in the most hateful of speech, derogatory speech about our own fellow citizens. He lost precisely in those areas. Unfortunately, it's not enough. It's not enough because a government has been formed, and I am disappointed at two regional parties who have joined the government and given it the legitimacy to form a central government. The problem with regional parties, it seems to me, they can't look beyond their nose. They can't look beyond the boundaries of their own states. And therefore, in order to get certain concessions for their own states, they've participated in a government which, unfortunately, till now seems much of the same. We have the same Home Minister, we have the same Prime Minister, we have the same Finance Minister, we have the same External Affairs Minister. It's more of the same. And I don't see them actually drawing back from any of the draconian legislation that they propose to complete in their third term, whether it is CAA, whether it is UCC, whether it is a strengthening of coercive laws. I wish somebody would get up and say, we don't want to be a part of this. We are waiting for that breakthrough.
That moment, yes. Pamela, when we look back on the last 10 years, among the many profound failures is the failure of institutions that we had imagined would hold the executive in check, as Niraja said. The political opposition, parliament, but let's look at institutions like the Election Commission, the judiciary, the higher judiciary. The civil service, I was a member of the civil service, and it was also imagined by Sardar Patel to be the steel frame, and he called it the steel frame because there was an expectation that even if politicians push boundaries, stir emotions around caste and religion and so on, this body of professional civil servants would hold the country together. So the civil services, the police, the judiciary, and the institution that you've been spent your life in, which is the media, its collapse is spectacular. We look back at the emergency where there was a reluctance, but there was, even during the emergency, there were open signs of revolt. I mean, the blank editorial page. There were many ways that the media was chafing at this, at the stealing of its freedoms. You're not even seeing that happen. You're seeing the media almost sort of celebratory drum beating for the ruling establishment and its ideology, but also as purveyors of hate. So where have these institutions gone wrong?
Actually, when I was listening to Neera and Niraja, it struck me that one institution collapses on the other. You need all institutions to function.
Stand together. Yeah.
Yes, because and the media has a very special role to play because it's a purveyor of information to the people. And if this central institution collapses, then it means that the center is hollowed out. And actually, I'm not exaggerating when I see the media as one of the centers of democracy, because I think Article 19(1)(a) is central to the Constitution. You take that away and its soul disappears. So therefore, I think it's very important to underline the institutional collapse that has happened. And I believe that the collapse of the media has played a disproportionate role in this, because it has not brought the ordinary person up to speed with what is happening in the corridors of power. So we are in a very, very, dangerous area. Now, what is different between the emergency of Mrs. Gandhi and the undeclared emergency we see today is that the emergency of Mrs. Gandhi was a finite one. It was declared and it was withdrawn.
It was acknowledged.
Acknowledged,
it was declared,
yes. And the thing at that point was, you're quite right to note that the media of those days, mostly the newspapers, because there was nothing else. The radio was under the control of the state, and so also television. So it was only the newspapers, and the newspapers had their own problems. You had the big English language newspapers take over the speaking voice, as it were. But there was some resistance. What we are seeing today is an identification that has been built, and this is very peculiar to the Modi era, because
identification with power.
With power. You see, the thing is, what Modi realized post 2002 was that in order to have his own voice, he would need to suppress the voice of a critical, engaged media. Remember, in 2002, there was a lot of critical reportage. But the point is, the manner in which he handled the media subsequently, is very interesting. And finally, he built bridges with the owners of media. So when you do that, it's command responsibility. If you control the owners of media, then everyone falls in line, from the topmost editor to the sub-editor,
But Pamela, all the way down the line, even within the media, there was so little resistance. I mean, there has been shining lights which are exceptions, but the mainstream doesn't seem to have resisted.
But then you're talking of an independent media, but here we are talking of a corporate media that is dependent on the government for largesse. And not just largesse for the media house, but for all the various businesses that the proprietor of the media may have. So this model of business, that the media adopted for itself, I think is central to the collapse of the media.
So let's start looking, at the next 5 years. We have a new government. When we put this panel together, my friend Niraja remarked quite correctly that we are political scientists, we are not astrologers. Still, I'm requesting, just in terms of your insight about how the polity in this country and around the world functions, what can we expect as we look forward in terms of redressing some of what we've spoken about? And let me start with precisely the freedom that you spoke about, which I would say the freedom of conscience, the freedom to dissent, to disagree publicly with state power and state policies. Today, we are in a place where, the strongman leader, the nation is sort of synonymous with the strongman leader and his party, his government, and his religion are all sort of welded into one. So if you disagree with the government or with the leader, you're against the nation and you're against the religion and so on. So we're living in times when dissent has become extremely dangerous as an activity, public dissent. We're seeing political prisoners in very large numbers. Some of the best hearts and minds of this country are locked up for years without trial. We're seeing the weaponization of laws, anti-terror laws, money laundering laws, sedition laws, and so on. We're seeing civil society organizations, again using these same agencies and crushing their dissent. How much can we expect the freedom of conscience to be restored, to be repaired, which would require the media to once again find its voice, judges and the civil services, members of the civil service to find their conscience, Do you see a prospect? Is there, we can all hope, but is there reason to realistically hope that dissent as central to a democracy is going to return?
If you were to put this question to somebody who is a votary of all the, of all the things that you have listed, they would say, well, the alternative media has enabled even the check that has occurred through the electoral process on arbitrary executive power.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
But let's leave that aside. Because all of these things take place within the framework of ostensible legality, there is no reason why they cannot continue. There is no reason to believe that they would be restrained in terms of the freedom to dissent, for instance, that you mentioned.
It's a lawfare against.
That's right. That's right. And the misuse of or the use of certain aspects of the law in these particular ways, there is no particular reason to expect that this would be restrained in times to come. As far as the other institutions that you mentioned are concerned, which is the judiciary and the civil service and the media, that's a slightly different story. The media is structurally constrained in the ways that Pam mentioned. It's constrained by ownership. That is a structural constraint. That doesn't go away. So long as media owners stand to benefit from whatever it is that this partisanship brings them, we cannot expect a change, right? As far as the judiciary and the civil service is concerned, and you said, will people rediscover their conscience? Much will depend on whether their partisanship or their sort of sometimes even proactive compliance, with how the executive thinks was out of fear, in which case we could expect perhaps a reconsideration, or was it out of conviction, in which case we cannot, right? So much will depend on, and we don't know enough about this, but I too, like Neera, I too take some heart from the fact that in 17 seats that the BJP lost, these were the constituencies where the maximum number of hate speeches were made. So if 17 seats is a lot of seats, so I think ultimately it's the wisdom of the people, it's the wisdom of the electorate, and maybe in the longer run that is again what will, what will enable us to break out of this. Should we therefore be investing our hopes in the judiciary and the civil service and the media, or wait for a popular mandate?
No, I think what Niraja said, it troubles me. I look at my former colleagues in the civil service very often, and I wonder if, and they're people I've loved, I've worked with, people of great caliber. When I see many of their actions and of younger people, I know how much power the state has for the good. I worry and wonder how much of what they're doing now is driven by fear, also by career, interests of career, and how much of it is driven by ideological conviction. And that, I think, is going to determine, in my opinion, what possibility of change there is. We had two recent High Court judges retiring and announcing their close affiliation with the RSS. That's something that it's like a coming out that is deeply troubling, because the RSS, you might believe in it, but it's not a constitutional it's an ideology that is not in conformity with our constitution. You've held the highest constitutional positions with adherence to an ideology which is contravenes that very constitution. So it's a jumbled sort of question, Neera, and I know you have a headache, and I'm sorry to complicate matters, but given the fact that ideology is penetrating an ideology contrary to the constitution is penetrating our institutions. How realistic is the expectation that the freedom of conscience will be restored?
Well, there are two aspects to it. A, I think we are underestimating the ideological commitment of the civil service to this right-wing ideology, because we know the number of preparation groups for UPSC that are being proliferated around Delhi University. I remember going for a couple of lectures to Missouri, to the academy, and being completely taken aback by the kind of responses, Tukre Tukre Gang, Kanhaiya Kumar, why Nehru? And at that point I did say, look, guys, we did a project in Delhi and we asked them, who do you have faith in? And without fail, they all said, Afsar. They didn't say MLA, they didn't say MP, they said Afsar. And you people are going to go there with a prejudice, and finally on the third year I said, I'm not going. Because it's very, very uncomfortable. So the way the RSS has worked to staff the universities and to staff these courses, these what should we call them, kind of preparing them for UPSC, I think we have to see how subtly but how carefully the RSS has penetrated in the interstices of Indian society. You know, what they have done is what they have understood the nature of the biradari in North India. In a biradari, you know, everybody is there if there's a birth or a death or a wedding, and they're all just there and think, can we help? They have understood that. And in every neighborhood, there's an RSS office, and every Arya Samaj, they are giving lectures. We have to understand the depth, and I cannot think anybody is there to counter them. Certainly not the Congress, which only awakes around elections, but now this time a little earlier. And what has happened to our left is anybody's guess. The only other cadre which is capable of countering this kind of indoctrination is the left. But I'm very, very disappointed in the left. I have no idea what's happened to it. That is one. The other is...
And what's happened to it actually around the world, because like Germany, I mean, the far right, the Nazi party got 14.5%, the Communist Party got 4.5% of the vote.
Secondly, to take off on what Niraja talked about, legal autocracy, you know, no longer are regimes changed through military coups, through decorated generals in their uniforms. Not, I mean, the kind of movie we saw, for instance, Costa Gavras's Missing, where it dealt with Allende's regime in Chile being destroyed, and the number of dead bodies, because it's too dangerous. Too many people die, people get provoked. Now, democracy dies at the voters' table, or it dies through maintaining the facade of democracy but hollowing it out. So you have everything there. You have our constitution, we have our judiciary, our prime minister puts the constitution on his head, but it's emptied out, and doing it through law. It's not as if, so democracy has died through its own means. It's not as if there has been an army coup. The only remedying feature that we see is that across the world there have been 60 instances of what is called leaderless protests. Now, 20th century was a century of leaders. Mao Zedong, you had Lenin, you had Ho Chi Minh, you had Gandhi, you had Nehru, you had Amilcar Cabral. I mean, Che Guevara, you had a whole host
Nelson
of leaders.
Mandela.
Now these protests are leaderless. They are not organized. They function through the social media. And they just come, you look at the yellow vest protests in France. They started off against a rise in gasoline tax. And now, because apparently every driver keeps a yellow vest under his seat for emergency, they put on their yellow vest and protest against everything on earth. They keep erupting and disappearing before the police can catch them. There's 60 countries have been affected by this. And we saw this in an instance of the CAA movement and Shaheen Bagh. We saw this happening, and the government, of course, cracked down on them. But most of these protests are single issue. They make their mark and they disappear. But you just have to deal with just hordes of young people landing up on the street. and protesting. And I'm actually very happy that this has happened in the absence of a leadership or a cadre-based party or an organizational setup the way we had in the left in the 20th century. So we have a qualitatively distinct phenomena on our hands. It's worrying because sometimes the yellow vests have verged on violence. But most of the time they have been peaceful and they have just demanded, give us what is our due. And this seems to be the only remedy to legal autocracy or whatever you would like to keep it.
Yes, certainly. The CA protest, to my mind, was probably the most glorious moment after our freedom, because it was this leaderless upsurge of solidarity, of peaceful.
With people. The legislation didn't touch them.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
did it for their fellow citizens.
And they did for fellow citizens. It was solidarity. It was really, because it was a law which was discriminating against one portion of the community, and everybody came out and stood shoulder to shoulder. The farmers' protest was also that kind of movement. But Pam, I wanted to, again, because you've been part of the media, there's a structural, Niraja spoke about a structural barrier to expecting the media to act independently, which is its corporate ownership. But is that also sudden? There has been corporate ownership in the past. Somehow it was able to still negotiate a space for speaking truth to power. She also rightly said that our hope is the alternative media, and there was a recent survey by the right wing where they showed that the most popular channels on social media were almost all what they called of the left environment. Can we expect the mainstream media to learn from its disgrace of the last 10 years and re-emerge? But even more importantly, is there a chance that even the free, democratic, somewhat chaotic, unruly democratic space of voice of social media, is that going to be crushed? I mean, we can have both possibilities. Where do you see us going?
No, I agree. I agree with what you just said about the importance of the alternative media. The point is that the mainstream, the legacy media had been so undermined by itself and the ways of its functioning that, this slur, Godi media, actually stuck. And it was used not just by the farm protesters, but across. In this election, we saw people like Om Kashyap, being attacked and called Godi media when she went, Anjana Om Kashyap.
Anjana Om Kashyap, yeah.
She was well known and regarded also, and wherever she went, there were cries of Godi media behind her. So the point is, there may come a time, I'm not disputing it, that it would actually hurt the business model of, they'd lose so much credibility that it would hurt their business model.
I think more and more people, at least I met, said we've stopped watching
so there would
television
be a shift.
channels and
there would
and
be
we've
a
shifted.
shift.
Yeah.
There would be a shift. To
I think it's already happened.
NDTV has lost its viewership.
Yeah.
Ever since it came in the hands of Advani.
More than that, there's
Adani.
a demographic shift as well.
Yeah,
As we
younger
know,
people are more used.
Younger people.
Yeah, but I would also caution everyone on this leaderless upsurge, because you see what happens is there has to be some connection between offline and online. Online by itself cannot lead and create policies.
They don't want it to.
Yeah, they don't want it to be. But the point is, very often in these leaderless kind of upsurges,
But they've affected the discourse, no?
When the Bastille was stormed Had anybody seen or heard of Danton or Robespierre? They came only later when the storming of the Bastille turned into a revolution, transformed itself into a revolution, and they became the revolutionaries. Today's young people, I'm not glamorizing it, I'm just noticing this very interesting way in which across the world you have these young people protesting. They don't have an agenda. They don't want revolution. They're not even challenging the state.
No, I'm
They're
not
not saying
denying that.
change. It's not Leninist notion of taking
No,
over
I'm
state.
not denying
They
that.
are just
Neera,
protesting.
I'm not denying that.
And
What
in
I'm
social media,
saying
the
is,
use of humor, the use of satire.
yes, but there are limits to all this. The point is,
There is limit.
attention spans are limited. And people, I mean, the Arab Spring is a very major moment. And it did have a potential of overthrowing even one Arab regime. If it could have overthrown them, it would have made a huge difference. We wouldn't have had Gaza if that had happened. The point is, it did not happen. And why did that not happen? It's because the material forces that were controlling these societies did not shift. It was only at the level of argumentation and articulation. I mean, you know, I'm actually going against what I myself believe, that we should speak out. But the point is that it has to be linked with something far more stable and rooted on the ground, you know. And here, in this election, I believe we've seen a very major shift among civil society. I think we should acknowledge that, in the sense that look at electoral bonds. If the alternative media and the alternative activists, people who went to the Supreme Court day after day over so many years to get that judgment, and that extraordinary judgment from a Supreme Court that was supine. It was an amazing thing. And that indicated how this works, in the sense that you have to be linked to a larger, and you know, look at what happened in Bangalore, for instance. Karnataka model has now emerged because during this entire period, Karnataka really told you, I mean, a whole lot of civil society groups emerged, you know, actually auditing their own institutions, you know, which is very...
I think what Pamela is saying is that whereas the rebellious media, the independent rebellious media is of value, the mainstream has to assert itself. The prospects of that is problematic if the structures of ownership, etc., don't change. I think that's where we are. Let me, you know, for want of time, leap into, if I have to choose, you know, the central, you know, where I would see the central symptom of the collapse of secular democracy in the last 10 years, it is the hate campaign against Muslims. And it is as central as the hate and violence and massacre of Jews in Nazi Germany. We are seeing a similar kind of movement here. Is life going to be safer, more secure for Muslims? Are they going to be, is their equal citizenship going to be at last acknowledged? Or are they going to be subjected to the same kind of hate speech, lynching, violence, erasure from political representation that we have seen over the last 10 years? I think it's a critical, it's about our Muslim brothers and sisters, 200 million people, but I think it's also about the foundational idea of this country itself. Because we were constituted on the idea that Pakistan might be formed on the basis of religion. We are a country which gives equal respect and rights to people of every other religion. If every religion, do each of you expect that to change if democracy is to repair? Niraja.
It should change, but whether it will change, I mean, I am quite clear that what I like to call passive communalism will continue, because it has struck roots. That poison runs very deep in our society, in our social fabric today. it would have to be something quite cataclysmic in the material lives of people, possibly in the economic sphere or something, which would deflect attention from that. So I think that that poison runs deep, and that's why I believe that passive communalism will continue. Whether that means that whether that means that people would you know not just practice discrimination in their everyday lives, but actually go out and hurt someone physically, practice violence, that is another matter.
Or speak or speak of violence.
Or speak of violence, that is another matter. One doesn't know how far, how much leeway there would be for that kind of thing. So, I mean, I was intrigued the way you were asking the question as to why you would hope that it would be why you would expect it to be any different. Because, as Neera said before, while the two major parties that have allied with the ruling party to form this coalition are generally, have a secular record, I doubt that any of them would actually, either of them, the two major, that either of them would actually take a stand on the kind of low intensity communalism that pervades our society today, on the everyday communalism. Especially because the state has plausible deniability. The state can say, well, this was not emanating from the state, this is vigilantism or whatever else. Then it's a question of somebody being booked by the law, impunity, punishment, whatever else, all of those steps that follow or don't follow. So the point is that because of this plausible deniability, the alliance partners are unlikely to take a stand on anything of this kind, except, and here I disagree with Neera here, I think if it was something like the Uniform Civil Code, I think there they would take a stand. I think they would stop at that. So they would not hesitate on that issue. But, the first test is the new criminal laws, which come into effect on July the 1st. What are the alliance partners going to do about that?
I wish I could disagree with you, Niraja. I long to disagree with you because in recent years I've been seeing and across the country when I travel, sitting separately with people of Muslim identity, they speak of living with everyday fear as something that has become part of their lives. And somebody steps out from the family, you're worried. Somebody goes on a train, you're worried. That has to change. And there has been, the discontent that the voter communicated in many parts of the country, including Uttar Pradesh, Haryana and Rajasthan, etc. Was the discontent connected with a rejection of hate? And if not, what are the next 5 years going to look like for our Muslim brothers and sisters, Neera?
There is one factor we must take into account. I think there is a lot of churn in the BJP and in the RSS. We probably don't know about it because it's such a closed party. I mean, all the problems of the Congress are on the front page of newspapers. I think there is churn, and especially the fact that the BJP lost in areas which Prime Minister had uttered these hateful words is an indication that now they're not going to tolerate it. People want to just carry on with their everyday lives and not live in fear or live in hate. They're dealing with their fellow citizens, irrespective of their religion, in everyday life.
So you're saying passive communalism, as long as we don't articulate it and act on it.
Yeah, I think it might change. I don't know. I hope I'm not wrong. It might change because of internal churn within the BJP and within the RSS. If Bhagwat could say all those things, someone said, of course, they're all the same. I said, no, he said it publicly. And they are very irritated that it was a single man election. The election itself was not free and fair. I mean, I think we arrived at that decision. And the legitimacy of a party depends upon whether the elections are free and fair. Now, we make that public and say, look at the election commission, they acted, as if they were not there.
Yeah,
it was shameful the way 22,000 people, individuals, wrote to the election commission when the PM used these words like, for our fellow citizens. No answer. Now, there is a certain amount of irritation that you're writing to an election commission who's supposed to be in charge of a free and fair election. Where are the free and fair elections? You put people in jail, you freeze the accounts of the Congress party, you buy people over, you're lost. Ajit Pawar lost. This other guy from the Thackeray guy lost. I mean, let's see what happened in the Maharashtra election. It's going to be very, very interesting whether the Congress retains its edge. But I think what happened in UP and Maharashtra and Rajasthan is stupendous. We didn't expect it. I was prepared to go to work in the library and I'm not going to watch BJP getting more and more seats. Suddenly, I put on the TV and 100 seats they've crossed. It was so exciting. So, in a way, I think Indian politics is very unexpected. Maybe we are not up to date with it because political science has to come to terms with new concepts, new theories, which we were not talking about earlier. And one of them is the fact that the 8 days, what you're talking about, changing the material reality. When you have social policy substituting for social rights and the government giving you handouts, they don't want a change of means of production. I mean, that's the problem. You give them, they were not happy with it, they want more. But free bus rides and giving them money, I mean, I'm strictly against this whole notion of giving money. You create employment.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you.
I mean, look, listen to Marx, who said that you get a sense of agency when you are working. That's your work. So, the whole scene has changed so much. Upar se social policy is imposed without civil society mobilization, and people are getting bagfuls of grain or what started in Tamil Nadu, if I'm not mistaken, but not a very healthy policy.
No, in Tamil Nadu, it was linked to midday meals.
Which had meaning. Pam, sorry to keep boxing you into the media here, but the media has been, the breakdown of the media, its betrayal of democracy is so central to the last 10 years. Do you think that the disgrace that is being acknowledged by people, ordinary people on the ground, by the increasing choice of social media which is not participating, do you think the use of the media to advance the politics of hate, can we hope to see a reduction at least in that?
May I add a corresponding question? Do you think that this whole tradition that we have, the wire also began in India of group funding, of people funding the newspapers, whether it's Le Monde or Der Spiegel or Guardian or New York Times, when readers are funding them, would it help?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the media has played a very major role in actually promoting the anti-Muslim sentiment that has today become quite normalized, whether in a passive or overt way.
I think when the history of our times is written, it's going to be held very highly culpable.
Very different. The point is that there was a shift in the sensibility and approach to fraternity, a very basic constitutional guarantee. And so the media was supposed to, at one point, the media spoke about the citizen, and the citizen was an all-encompassing entity, including across religions, castes, and so on. Then they began to talk about the consumer. This was post-liberalization, and the consumer cannot be the citizen. Because again, you're defined now by your ability to be in the market, represent yourself in the market. So these changes, and slowly it became, the people who actually endorse a certain ideology, the ruling party. So that's what the media has actually come to do in a very overt way. So I don't know about social media having sort of pushed back sufficiently against this. Of course, you have very angry comment and so on, but it has not really come together as a kind of check. And we are living in times where you're going to see more and more of the kind of laws that this government has enacted already, significantly anti-Muslim laws, like the Citizenship Amendment Act. Like that, you're going to see more of these laws.
If digital media itself will be, its independence is likely to be.
They've implemented it,
yeah. And these kind of laws would mean that,
even this free space is going to...
will be finished. Already that is happening, we've had, now we're going to have a digital media act, which will really control the digital media, because they know that this is where a smidgen of independence is being exercised. So they will go for these institutions. And the big fellows, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or X or any of them, they'll be happy to fall in line as long as they get their hits and their posts and their, subscribers. So you're not going to see a pushback from the big media. Big media, when I talk of these platforms, these huge intermediary platforms, they're not going to help you change the discourse. So then again, we have to come back to people, and also people who believe in a certain thing and then put it forward as a kind of national objective. And I think that is very important. The ability, I often wonder, why don't ordinary citizens see the importance of actually defending freedom of the press, freedom of the media? They don't see it as a political issue. No election has been fought on this issue, although it's so central to power in so many different ways,
So I know we're running out of time, but from our two university professors, the liberal arts university has also been dramatically destroyed in these 10 years. And the freedom of thought and expression, Rabindranath Tagore's poem comes back to me over and over again in these times, where the mind is without fear, where the head is held high, where knowledge is free. Do you expect anything to happen to make the university a place again where knowledge is free? Neera, why don't you start, and Neera?
Me? She's expert, but of course the right wing has taken over. My only problem is that does the right wing have to be like this? Because if you look at the conservatives in England, they were right wing, or they are right wing. They are the most learned scholars in the country. Other day I was watching a podcast between Terry Eagleton, who's marvelous at arguments, and Roger Scruton, who's no more. And I couldn't help admiring Roger Scruton. They are not saying go and kill people. They are interested in different things, minimal state, maximum civil liberties, tradition, things like that. So there is a way of being a right wing. We need a secular right wing. Why not? But you have to give us a substantive agenda. The problem is they have appointed the different kind of mediocrities in our universities as vice chancellors, as colleagues. And I don't know what's going to happen to students. I mean, we're breeding generations of students saying Muslims are responsible for everything. That's one of the professors in Delhi University, what he's been doing. So in a way, I don't understand if India wants soft power. The one aspect of soft power is your educational system. Today, your students are going right after school abroad. They're going to Ukraine, they're going to all kinds of countries, but they're not staying in India. Why don't you strengthen your university system? But that is the sad part. They don't recognize that the university, the kind of people who come out of your universities, are going to add to your soft power. But I think Niraja is the...
No, I mean, I completely agree with you that recruitment practices in recent times have been such that even if knowledge is given a completely open field, what will that knowledge be worth? That is something to think about, because recruitment practices are crucial to the standards of a university, or the standards that a university can maintain or aspire to. That's one. But the other thing is, and this is now well established, the Swedish think tank VDEM, which does the democracy reports on an annual basis, is also now doing academic freedom reports for the last couple of years on an annual basis. And there is, these two are running in parallel tracks. So if 72%, I think it was last year, of the world's population was living in autocracies, 80% of the world's population was living in countries where there was no academic freedom, or where academic freedom had diminished. Sorry, not that there was no academic freedom, but that academic freedom had diminished. So, there is a very clear overlap. So the trajectory of academic freedom and the trajectory of democracy are not de-linked or unlinked from each other. Academic freedom depends upon, and the conditions for academic freedom can only be provided in a robust democracy. But having said all of that, and all of what we've discussed in the last few minutes, I think we haven't touched on the role of the opposition. We have talked about social movements, we've talked about civil society activists, we've talked about leaderless movements, but the political opposition, the elected opposition, which is now present in the Lok Sabha in much larger numbers, has to also step up to the plate and try and do more. Hopefully will not be restrained in the way that it was in the previous Lok Sabha, where there was, en masse suspensions and dismissals of expulsions from the House and so on. So that, that remains an area of hope.
And also the parliament. Look at the parliament. It has been hollowed out, and unless you bring back the oppositional voice within parliament, you will not be able to revive democracy, repair the dangers, repair the tears of that structure.
So friends, that was a sobering discussion, a very thoughtful discussion. Like all of us, when the results came in of the elections June 4th, there was a sense of immense relief that we can breathe again, that we're getting our country back. That feeling was there. I think as the days have passed, there's a sense of what should I say, a restraint on one's optimism. But I still feel the people of India, ordinary people of India, working people of India, have given us reason to hope. It is a democratic pushback to the failures of democracy that the people of India have. We will choose our leaders in the way that we wish. We will have our issues, we will have a voice. I think that did emerge. So I wanted to end with asking each of you, and we can stop for 5 minutes and you can think about it. What are the things that give you hope for India's democracy?
Do you see hope?
Actually, let me get back. After when the CA protests were going on, a lot of young activists were put into prison. At one time, Natasha Narwal and Devangana were released, along with a young man called Asif Iqbal Tanha. And the media had gathered, and I was very, very struck by the fact that he came out, he knew the media would be there, he somehow had found a mask, and he wrote on top of it, no NRC, no CAA, and he wore it, stepping out of prison. It was an act of remarkable sort of resistance, And I did a long interview with him, a long discussion with him. And at the end of it, I asked him, do you have hope? And he gave a reply to me. He said, Mayusi kufr hai. Kufr is blasphemy, and he spent most of his life's education was in a madrasa. He had religious training. So he said, Despair is blasphemy. And I thought that's something that, I thought it was a profound idea. We have to hold on to hope. I just want us to think about what is it in these dark times that we can hold on to and believe that there is still hope for our country and for democracy. Yes.
Well, I mean, certainly the numbers delivered in this election have been reason to hope.
Yeah. 6 out of 10 people
That's right.
have rejected the politics of the RSS.
But at the same time, we don't know what they've rejected. Whether they've rejected arrogance, whether they've voted because they're, because of livelihoods and lack of, we don't know what it is, but we can guess at that. Sorry, I've lost my.
You said numbers was
yeah,
one.
The numbers. So but at the same time, we need to remember that 240 is well below the majority mark, but it is, in my understanding, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am on this. It is the largest tally of the single largest party in any coalition we've had, and we've had a lot of coalitions. Mostly in coalition governments in India, the single largest party has been anywhere between 140, 150 to 200. The Congress had 206 in 2004. But this is the largest number that a single largest party in the coalition has had so far. So we shouldn't underestimate the importance or significance of that either. I think the hope ultimately, this is a question you're addressing to the wrong demographic. You shouldn't be asking people our age this question. This is a question best addressed to young people.
The young people who are on the other side
on
of the
the
camera.
other side of the camera, behind the cameras.
Okay,
yes, I think, and my faith really is in them. I think it is the young of this country, except that they have been terribly badly shortchanged, both by the educational system as well as by the lack of employment and the double whammy that the two together constitute. So I think the young, if they continue to come out and speak their mind and assert themselves, I think it's a magnificent act of bravery that they do this, given the disadvantages under which they labor.
Wonderful. Neera, where do you see hope?
Somewhere we should get our priorities right. And there's another chain that political scientists have to come to terms with. We had always thought that rights come in stages: civil, political, then social, then fraternity. We got some social rights during the UPA government, but then suddenly you realize that your civil liberties had gone. And if your civil liberties go Article 14, Article 19, everything has gone. And I think the restoration of civil liberties, the jailing of young people, I mean, which government jails its own students? In France and in the United States, they erupted when students were being put in prison. And the media, the civility they were showing, not that I watched the Prime Minister's interviews with his acolytes, whatever Ravish Kumar was showing sometimes, or sometimes Akash Banerjee, or sometimes Dhruv Rathi, which is what I watch, and the civility with which they were talking to him, it was nauseating. That freedom of expression to criticize your people you have elected to rule us has to come back, because accountability is the cornerstone of democracy. And once I think that concentration is on civil liberties again, remember after the emergency, the first civil society organization that came up in a big way was the Civil Liberties Organization. After that, a rush of organizations came around. But civil liberties are the most important. It was started by Maoists and Marxists in the first place. But that is I think we have to sort out our priorities, and civil liberties is the utmost priority.
And you see hope there?
I see hope because, you can't have young people being exposed to a whole range of opinions across the world in the social media, or even films, and then not wanting the same thing for themselves. So in a way, to write, to speak, to write poetry. And I think our poets have done, Urdu poets have done the most phenomenal work in this way. Hussain Haidari is a Hindustani Mussalman who, it makes you shake. मुझ में गीता का सार भी है, उर्दू की अखबार भी है, मैं रमज़ान का महीना भी रखता हूँ, मैं गंगा स्नान भी करता हूँ. I mean, what else do you want? You want all of that. That is our culture. And the first thing perhaps in restoration of our civil liberties would be the remembrance of a shared culture. The stupid Hindutva notion is idiotic. We are the product of a Sanji Virasat. Accept it. Accept it. And accept it, it offers infinite more possibilities.
Wonderful, yeah.
No,
Pamela.
I agree completely with what Neera has just told us, because I think it is a common resource that we have. They use the word commons for land and trees and so on, but these are also our intellectual commons, and it belongs to all of us. And unfortunately, what's happened is that huge walls have come up within this space, pitting person against person, and creating mayhem. If we have that ability to actually break down those walls, and be able to, and also remember, knowledge generation is for everyone. What happens in the universities happens in the media, it happens in your schools. It's your educated young who will go on to articulate the future. If you don't have that organic growth, it means that we are a dead society. And if this election gives us some hope, it is the hope that we can perhaps renew our tryst with the commons. I would like to end there because that's what we need.
Yes, I just want, if 2 points can be made very clear to the young people who have been fed with hate speech. A, not every Mughal emperor broke temple. Some did. Okay, Babur did and Aurangzeb did, but they didn't do it for religion. They very often did it for power and glory. Shah Jahan didn't break temples, Shahagi didn't break temples, Akbar didn't break temples, and Aurangzeb gave the maximum land grants to temples, to build temples. Under Akbar's rule, the whole of Braj region came up. I mean, Christian cult, Vaishnavism, remember Ravindra Kumar used to say Vaishnavism came out of the Mughal court. That is one. Secondly, after Babur, every Mughal emperor was born in India. By today's standard, they were citizens of India. They made us a part of themselves and they became a part of ourselves. And finally, Akbar and Bahadur Shah Zafar used to play holy with the people. Tell me of one colonial white officer who played holy with his people. Racist comments came from the colonial power. They are a part of us and we are a part of them. Where is this artificial idiotic Hindutva which is based upon false history coming from? And when you talk of ancient Hindu culture, please remember, A, the German romantics discovered it. Raja Ram Mohan Roy borrowed from them. It is upper caste, it is Sanskritic, it is definitely Brahmanical. It has no place for the so-called lower castes. It is not a very pretty picture to hold that up as your... There is a difference between Hindutva as ideology and Hinduism as faith. I mean, there should be basic difference. But I've known friends, good friends who suddenly say, no, there's no difference. They are all about Hindu. I mean, tell me, Jawaharlal Nehru wrote more about Hinduism than the present leadership. I don't think they know anything about Hinduism. I mean, I feel very strongly about
No, but
these
this
issues.
is all about recovering of voice.
Yeah.
And the importance of that. And you see, for instance, the Dalit mobilization. Look at the powerful poetry that the Dalit Panthers brought
The
to the
Dalit
table.
Panthers have brought.
Amazing. And similarly, I mean, like you have
Northeast,
already referenced,
Kashmir, yeah, in English.
You've already referenced the importance of Urdu, in the national movement and in the post-national years as well. And we have to discover all that, you know.
They'll bring romance into our life,
Yeah,
and also
yeah.
bring protest into our
Yeah,
life,
yeah.
because all the poets of the national movement were Urdu speakers.
Bollywood did it till recently.
Bollywood.
Bollywood did it till recently.
Wonderfully, actually.
Till recently.
They wrote the Urdu speakers. I mean, the whole notion of inqalab, the whole notion of, these were written by Urdu poets. We should start remembering they're a part of us. They are not infiltrators or termites. I mean, the whole thing is disgusting.
So, friends, I mean, that was a lovely conversation. I think the dark clouds that had gathered over our land over the last 10 years, this election has shown those clouds parting. We're seeing, rays of light coming through. We are conscious that this darkness can gather again. And I think this is a moment when we need to regroup what is best within us. And that's what you spoke. Our young people, our culture where we've lived together, where we're such a beautiful country because we've taken so much from every culture, every religion, every way of life. I worked with homeless children. I used to love to tell them, we're such a lovely country. We have so many festivals. We have Diwali, we have Eid, we have Holi, we have Christmas. And they would, and these are all our festivals. This is how we've grown up. So I think, perhaps what is best in our civilization tradition of 2000 years will prevail. And that is our hope. And our capacities, which I've seen among poor people, their capacities for kindness and care, which is ultimately what fraternity is about, that we care for each other. I believe that will still prevail. And that is our hope. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
ये दाग दाग उजाला ये शब कसीदा सहर, वो इंतजार था जिसका, ये वो सहर तो नहीं।